Well, I gotta say that Ubisoft has had quite the week. A few days ago we had Ubisoft Forward, which is probably the equivalent to half a Ubisoft E3 press conference, just without the typical cringy moments. We saw some new gameplay for Watch Dogs Legion, which looks interesting, but some of the previews that I've seen stress the unfortunate issue of repetitiveness in just 3 hours of gameplay, which has me quite concerned that their bold play-as-anyone experiment may just end up being quickly forgotten once it arrives later this year. There was also a new Splinter Cell game revealed, or as I should emphasize, Ubisoft had their own Blizzard moment of do you have phones? Assassin's Creed Valhalla looks closer and closer to achieving Ubisoft's ultimate goal of creating an experience that almost mirrors that of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. We're now on attempt 3 and this time it looks promising. Let's just hope the game doesn't turn into a tedious slogfest like Odyssey became by hour 15, which could of course be eased with the purchase of some good old microtransactions. In other news, this entire event leaked almost days prior, and almost all of Ubisoft executives are actually a bunch of Harvey Weinstein. Surprise, surprise. Don't worry, after investigating themselves, Ubisoft promises they will do better, although judging by the long laundry list of creatives facing misconduct allegations, I don't even know who's left. This quote-unquote laundry list, might I add, includes Splinter Cell and Far Cry creative director Maxime Belland, as well as Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Origins, and Valhalla creative director Ashraf Ismail, as well as Chief Creative Officer Serge Hascott, Managing Director of Canadian Studios Yannis Mallet, and Global Head of HR Cecile Cornette. Anyway, Ubisoft were not able to talk about this super important situation, which first went public at least 3 weeks ago during Ubisoft Forward, due to quote-unquote timing, sure. But back to the contents of this event, we also saw another Battle Royale game, because why not? No Beyond Good and Evil 2 appearance, because I'm not really sure. Skull and Bones also did not show up because it's being rebooted to feature Fortnite-like live events and go full live service. So basically, Ubisoft is preparing to have another Breakpoint-like dumpster fire, although this time I think they even know it's coming. Oh, and also to end the event, Far Cry 6 got revealed, with the game's cinematic intro being shown in a CGI trailer which leaked a day prior. Would be nice if AAA publishers actually just showed the bloody game when they reveal it, but that's I guess too much to ask. Heck of an intro to this main discussion, but let us discuss the as usual ridiculousness and outrage surrounding an upcoming game which has shown almost nothing but is still getting slammed for bizarre reasons. Far Cry 6 is the latest installment in the franchise, this time taking us to the island Yara, a tropical paradise frozen in time. Yara is controlled by dictator or El Presidente Anton Castillo, the violent leader who grips the island of Yara with an iron fist, promising a return to its former glory with his son Diego following in his bloody footsteps. Their oppressive rule has ignited a revolution, in typical Far Cry fashion, because we for some reason cannot move on from the story beats of Far Cry 3 nearly a decade later. We play as Danny Rojas, the male or female voice lead protagonist, a local Yaran who becomes a guerrilla fighter that works to liberate the nation. The kicker this time around though is that Ubisoft went out and got some talent for the main antagonist, with Giancarlo Esposito taking on the role of Anton Castillo, and boy are people angry about this casting. Far Cry is a franchise that I have a love/hate relationship with. The gameplay and exploration can be enjoyable, the amount of freedom is well appreciated, especially in a game like Far Cry 5, some great moments like jumping in an attack helicopter and mowing down an outpost, although there were some balance issues present with that playstyle. Anyway, since Far Cry 3, we've been kinda seeing the same thing over and over again with slight differences, especially with the main baddie, which always seems to be you entering a new location and fighting back against the oppressive power. Although Far Cry 4 twisted it up by asking what if everyone is evil in the end, with Pagan Min actually being the best option, and Far Cry 5 asked what if David Koresh was actually right. Far Cry's stories definitely are not terrible. They have some decent elements, but they lack enough depth and character development, with much of the game's missions having you go there, shoot some baddies, and sometimes have a long extended cutscene of the main baddie showing us how bad he really is. The repetitive nature of this franchise drives me nuts, and this is not a specific story complaint because the open world definitely has the same problem as well. But really, that's one of many complaints I have with most of Ubisoft's portfolio. There's also the monetization nonsense notably present and getting worse in recent years with games like New Dawn and AC Odyssey. The writing is also pretty lackluster across the board, and I could go on and on, but I will acknowledge this franchise garnered garners some of the dumbest takes. I'm not sure why this is a thing, but it is. Far Cry 6 is currently facing a lot of anger. We have articles like Fanbyte's portrayals of Latinx characters in 2020 video games already have me tired. And CCN's Far Cry 6 reveal gives us another reason to cancel Ubisoft, which go after the game for two different reasons. The first, well, let's take a look at Fanbyte's article, and might I add, this piece came out when the game was first leaked, with almost no information or anything about the actual gameplay experience being revealed, and even right now we have little known about the game. So the piece begins, I don't like jumping the gun, which they most certainly do, because if they didn't, this article would not have been published. Anywho, it continues, a game in a series like Far Cry, which is notorious for controversy in regards to its politics, especially racial, taking place in a Latinx setting is the last thing I want in 2020. Far Cry 6 has already given enough information for me to be concerned, especially when it's analyzed in the context of a space that continues to visibly fumble with Latinx representation to often embarrassing levels. The piece next discusses the premise of the game, which appears to be a revolution story based off of Cuba, and maybe some influence with the current ordeal going on in Venezuela. Although again, we still don't really know, as barely anything has been shown, which getting upset about a game's representation at this point feels quite premature, and honestly just a bit ignorant. Now, while I have this article highlighted on the screen in certain colors like red, you may not notice that some of the words are hyperlinks to other opinion articles from over the years which criticize the Far Cry franchise, so let's quickly brush over the supposed controversy associated with race. The first link article goes to a Kotaku piece from 2012, which essentially argues that Far Cry 3 is the R-word because the game revolves around the white savior trope, which has our white protagonist Jason saving all of these natives. Another article linked in this Far Cry 6 piece comes from Rock Paper Shotgun, also making the same complaint. One problem that was literally the point of the game. My source, Far Cry 3 writer Jeffrey Yohalam, who told Penny Arcade in an interview last year, Jason is a 25-year-old white guy from Los Angeles, from Hollywood, so his view of what's going on in this island is his own view, and you happen to be looking through his eyes, so you're seeing his view. It's set on an island in the South Pacific, so immediately the thing that comes to mind is the white colonial trope, the Avatar trope. I started with that, and it's like, here's what pop culture thinks about traveling to a new place, and the funny thing is, that's an exaggeration of most games. They just don't expose it. What I didn't expect was that people who half listen, if you half listen to the story, it seems like it's reinforcing tropes that I disagree with, and it's like, no, we're going to take that and totally loop it back on what you think it is, and we're agreeing with the critique. And he would later add, it also feels like critics are not looking for meaning in the game either, so it's like all sides have just stopped listening to each other. The Far Cry 3 writer would provide a few examples, like Jason and Citra's fun scene in which he claims the whole point was to show how this rich kid thinks he's on top of the world, understands this culture, and is about to bang this hot native girl, but that obviously takes a huge turn. Regardless, much of games media portrays in articles Far Cry 3 being this controversial piece of media, which many dislike, which is the furthest from the truth. It's the most beloved of this franchise in my opinion. Anyway, next, another few articles linked in this Far Cry 6 piece were the dumb reviews and articles that were pissed that Far Cry 5 was not a commentary on rural America, and more specifically the Trump administration. We talked about this a few years ago, and many of these articles from GQ, Polygon, Vice Waypoint, Forbes, etc., reviewers were upset that the game did not get political about the current state of America. Games media failed to understand something so basic and obvious. Far Cry 5 was in development before Trump was even elected, and the plot was about more or less Joseph Seed and his cult being based off the real-life David Koresh and his Branch Davidians, the Waco Siege. Notably, Polygon gave Far Cry 5 a 6.5 out of 10 review because the game didn't get political enough. Far Cry 5 had the potential to say something interesting by setting the game in America, but its murky story and themes do more to taint the game's fantastic and playful open world than to give it purpose and meaning. As I said in 2018, the game getting more political literally would not have made the story better. Anyway, getting back finally to this Far Cry 6 piece, so far the writer has said that they don't trust Ubisoft because of their past history, citing a bunch of opinion pieces that I just believe are completely wrong with their analysis. Next, it says, none of this strikes me as too inherently egregious, aside from naming the Fangs for Hire the Amigos and pairing them alongside objects to be employed, which I'll just stop there and say that's quite the reach in my opinion, but we continue. However, I'm not inclined to give Ubisoft the benefit of the doubt when, as a result of an overwhelming amount of allegations about harassment and misconduct at the company's various studios, Ubisoft's CEO is only now deciding to address the fact that Ubisoft's all-white male editorial department, which oversees the creative decisions across the company's global studios, should be transformed. bottomed. No matter how much change and positive impact the employees of Ubisoft at the bottom push for in franchises like Far Cry or Watch Dogs, their efforts are easily squandered in the face of an embarrassing leadership composition that should have been addressed long before a wave of damning allegations against several high-profile figures. Which, make of that as you will. Does Ubisoft executive misconduct and allegations, as well as how their editorial department is composed of, I believe, 7 white guys, does that make Far Cry 6 already problematic? I don't know. This article fails to mention that Far Cry 6's narrative director, the guy who's writing the story, Navid Kavari, is not a white guy, which does somewhat poke a hole in this point of criticism, but regardless, I just find all this a bit ridiculous considering so little is known yet. Anyway, this fanbite article would next make a turn, crapping all over Cyberpunk 2077's portrayal of Jackie Wellis, a main character in the game, claiming CD Projekt Red, the developer, has painfully stereotypical writing for the Latin character, but the piece would continue discussing race and some other games that released in 2020, but I specifically wanted to concentrate on the Far Cry 6 criticism. And the fanbite article does conclude with the following. It says, "But the Far Cry series, Ubisoft, and the industry as a whole have never provided me with reasons to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't see it changing anytime soon." But let's proceed next to some reactions, because some of the top Twitter posts quoting this article come from a YouTuber who says, "I'm Latino, some of my ancestors were indigenous, Mexican, Spanish was my first language, yada yada yada, Latinx is not a word." That's been a very big criticism from a lot of people. "I'm tired of hearing it. My culture recognizes a gender binary and our language reflects that." Chris Ragund, another YouTuber, also chimed in saying Latinx is the R word because it looks at gender study developments in Western cultures and views it as a superior to the linguistic foundations of Latin culture and language. There, now you can be woke and not have to say stupid frickin' words. Now the next debacle surrounding Far Cry 6 is Giancarlo Esposito just being involved and playing a Latin character once again. The reason? Breaking Bad's Gus Fring actor is actually Italian and African American, the more you know. So some people are upset that Esposito is playing the role of a Spanish dictator instead of someone who actually does have a Latin background. Basically, you have quite a few people who believe that actors can only play their own race, which I find laughable, but that's what this CCN opinion piece is based on. Ubisoft is criticized on social media for hiring a non-Latino actor to play a Latino character. The actor's filmography could have been the reason why Ubisoft felt it was appropriate for Esposito to play the role. This is inexcusable though, as a company that did a month of on-the-ground research in Cuba should be expected to know something easily discoverable on an actor's Wikipedia page. Now, CCN writer, you want to know why Esposito was chosen? Because he's a huge name, a high-profile actor, which, like it or not, his fame from playing a Latin character in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which are some of the best shows ever created in my opinion, featuring one of the best villains ever created, Gus Fring. Next, the CCN piece makes another huge reach, saying Esposito casting isn't the only insensitive move that Ubisoft has made with Far Cry 6. Many on social media have also noted that Far Cry 6's trailer uses a yellow filter, a common trope for games and movies set in countries outside of the West. Only one problem with that claim: where does this yellow filter happen? Are we talking about the CGI trailer, which clearly has blue skies and what appears to be the sun coming down shining a yellow light? If we're actually talking gameplay screenshots, no yellow filter spotted, so I'm not really sure. Anyway, to the final part of this piece, it's stated boldly, the character of Anton Castillo features heavily in the game and is seen on the Far Cry 6 box art, making it unlikely that Ubisoft is going to change anything now. For a company that donated to Black Lives Matter, it is disappointing to see Ubisoft contribute to racial injustice in this way. Racial injustice, is that what we're describing this? My god. Also, as I've said before, people need to quit looking at multi-billion-dollar corporations and expecting compassion and care. They're in the business of making money, and judging by how greedy Ubisoft has gotten in recent years and the recent horrifying allegations, this is a company that likes to present themselves as being true progressives, when in reality they just don't care. That donation to BLM likely was a PR move, as was the one almost every company in the United States made, which includes Activision Blizzard, who still to this day have their lips zipped shut when it comes to the subject of Hong Kong and freedom protests. Now, heading over to the toxic cesspool that is his Twitter, a Ubisoft narrative designer actually called out her company, saying that the casting of Esposito was quote-unquote erasure. An IGN editor indirectly called out Far Cry 6, saying developers, Latinx representation isn't placing a tan character who speaks Spanglish with an ambiguous accent in your game. A content creator said, "It's weird how I see folks being labeled buzzkills for bringing up valid criticism about this Far Cry game. I love Giancarlo as an actor, but if you think the right response to actual Latinx people complaining about a non-Latinx actor playing a clearly Latinx role is to tell them to let people enjoy things, you might as well take BLM out of your bio because you really don't get it. Best believe if they hired a non-black person to play some African dictator in Far Cry 7, with a white creative director saying they used Rwanda as inspiration and added DLC that let you play with your dog named Jollof, they would be getting dragged all over the timeline right now." Well, to be fair, Ubisoft did already get away with Troy Baker portraying Asian antagonist Pagan Min, which definitely would not be able to happen in today's climate, but I will add that this Far Cry 7 example doesn't really work, considering Ubisoft would never do that. There is some common sense here, like that this story is not being written by a white guy, and also Giancarlo is beloved for his portrayal of a Latin character, so Ubisoft wanted to try and utilize that fame for Far Cry 6. But in this tweet there's also mention of the dog name, because Far Cry 6 features a dog named Chorizo, which can be translated to sausage in Spanish, and of course some take issue with this. Another IGN editor took to Twitter saying, "White friends, have you named your dog Sausage, or a specific sausage such as Bratwurst? Considering the amount of dogs that are actually named Oscar, I would say probably yes," but she does continue, "One day I'd love to make a game that played into white American culture. The white male lead is named John and he's an office worker and his sidekick is a white woman named Sandwich. Some of y'all really don't think about what these Spanish words actually mean, I swear. One problem with this statement, Ubisoft just likes food items as animal names. For Christ's sake, Far Cry 5 has a bear named Cheeseburger and a mountain lion named Peaches." In regards to the dog, there was also some Twitter users getting worked up over the blue collar, claiming it's insensitive to things happening in Latin America right now, because apparently evil people are using blue collars, I guess. I don't know, people. I'm just exhausted by these takes and the reaches that they're trying to make. Even Forbes has jumped on this pre-order bonus and the outrage starting to emerge already, arguing that Ubisoft better deliver on expectations made in marketing and not steer away from making a statement, because apparently it will not fly like it did with Far Cry 5, because of the current political climate, I suppose. The whole Giancarlo Esposito outrage actually reminds me of a story that we talked about a few years back, maybe something that you guys remember, in which journalist trashed Rockstar Games for hiring Noshir Dalal, a Japanese and Parsi actor who portrays Charles Smith, a Native American character in Red Dead Redemption 2. The article made outrageous claims against Rockstar, accusing them of black and red face, as well as claiming the character of Charles Smith was a R-word Rockstar caricature. Like with Esposito portraying Spanish characters, Noshir Dalal has portrayed a Native American character in the past before, and put on his resume that he is pretty damn ethnically ambiguous, and his look covers a wide range of ethnicities. Comparing this Far Cry 6 outrage to that Red Dead 2 article, it is the same conclusion that actors should not be allowed to portray any other race other than their own, which I disagree with. Would also probably put Cliff Curtis and a number of Hollywood actors out of business if that ever happens, since that kinda is their shtick. Anyway, to wrap this up, I have no idea how Far Cry 6 will turn out. The story is centered around a revolution. The game's narrative director mentioned the influence of Cuba, which included them having a team spending time there, and I'm sure we'll have some story missions inspired by real history, like maybe the Bay of Pigs invasion, which could be compelling, but we'll have to see. The other big part of the story is the relationship of Anton and his son Diego, which, looking at the game's cover, if you look closely you can see devil horns, which may indicate he's just a monster in the making, potentially far worse than Anton. I don't really expect much from Ubisoft these days because I've been let down far too often, almost always interesting premises and settings that are just never capitalized upon because of lackluster writing. At least, it's been the case since 3. For the actual gameplay experience, this is said to be the franchise's largest map ever, which doesn't make me feel anything, as size does not translate to quality, ha 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 ha, as we've seen before with other Ubisoft games. We do have a few in-game screenshots of Far Cry 6, which shows off a little bit, like we see some climate, some torrential rainfall coming down, poor weather, it looks really cool, and also some tanks, which tanks sounds pretty cool. But yeah, the outrage surrounding this game has already gotten very dumb, and as usual, I'm certain this won't be the last time we're talking about ridiculous articles being written about a Far Cry game. But anyway, what do you make of the outrage? Do you think Giancarlo Esposito being casted was a mistake? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so do make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games, and again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.